Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to this webinar on dissemination and confidentiality claims. This webinar will last for 3 hours, concluding at 2 p.m. Helsinki time. Before we begin, I will run through some technical information about the audio broadcast. Audio will be available through the Event Center tool. Once you join the event, you should automatically be connected to the audio broadcast. If the audio broadcast panel is not visible, you can connect to it manually by selecting Communicate from the top menu and then Join Audio Broadcast. Ensure the sound is on and speakers or headsets are connected. You can control the audio volume in the audio broadcasting panel, which should open automatically. Two-way audio is disabled, so you cannot verbally communicate with the participants, the presenters, or the panelists during the event. Direct communication will take place through the question and answer panel. If you have a question, please type them in the box below the Q&A. The list of presenters and panelists is located on the top of the screen. Before you send your question, use the drop-down list and select all panelists, then click the Send button and wait for an answer. The ECHA Help Desk and ECHA experts will respond to your questions via the Q&A panel, on the phone after the webinar, or through the formal process of the ECHA Help Desk. Please note that if you submit a question, you will need to monitor the Q&A panel for a response and remain logged into the webinar until you receive an answer. The webinar will remain open for 1 hour after the last presentation, during which time questions can be answered, so stay logged in if you had not received a response to your question. We may decide to call you directly after the webinar, in which case we will inform you via the Q&A panel, organize a suitable time slot, and confirm your contact details. Once you have submitted a question during the webinar, if our panelists inform you to contact the ECHA Help Desk, you can find information about submitting your questions in this slide. Note that the ECHA Help Desk provides support on ECHA's IT tools and service on REACH and CLP obligations. You will need to submit your question via the ECHA Help Desk contact form. The address is visible on your screen. Please select the option according to the nature of your question to ensure that it is sent to the correct contact in ECHA. After you have received an acknowledgement of receipt, we will answer within 15 working days. So let's now have a look at today's webinar program. Following this introductory presentation, an overview of the dissemination process will be given by Owen Brennan. The presentation will cover the different steps a registration dossier goes through before it is published on the ECHA website. At 11:30, we will move on to the next presentation by Janne Kilpinen on the filter rules that determine which information from the registration dossier will be published on the ECHA website. At 11:45, we will have a 15-minute break. At 12 o'clock, we will move on to the overview of confidentiality claims by Istvan Mak. The presentation will explain how to make a confidentiality claim and how to justify a confidentiality claim. At 12:20, we move on to the last presentation by Martin Albert on safety data sheet information. This presentation provides timelines and a detailed description of new confidentiality claims on safety data sheet information. Then there will be a brief wrap-up of the key messages and conclusions, followed by a Q&A session from 12:45 to 2 o'clock. So now I give the floor to Owen for his presentation.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Owen Brennan, and I'm here to give you a brief overview of dissemination and the dissemination process in ECHA. What I will cover in this presentation is what is dissemination, the process we use to disseminate dossiers, which dossiers we will disseminate, and I will briefly introduce the Euclid 5.4 and SDS information and show you some worked examples of how the dissemination works on specific pieces of information. So first, what is dissemination? Dissemination is very simply the publication of information from REACH registration dossiers on the ECHA website. And it's very closely linked with confidentiality, which is the protection of certain of this information from publication. Dissemination requires a balance to be struck between transparency and protection. Transparency in that ECHA has a responsibility to make public information about the safety of chemical substances and which chemical substances are available are on the European market, their risks, the quantity in which they are available, and to make this information available in the public interest. At the same time, ECHA also has a responsibility to registrants to protect their legitimate commercial interests and to promote the competitiveness of the EU chemical industry. The legal basis for dissemination is REACH Article 77, which requires ECHA to produce and maintain databases of information on all chemical substances, the CNL inventory and the harmonized CNL list. And REACH Article 119 on the electronic public access to information, which requires ECHA to make information publicly available free of charge over the internet on all registered chemical substances. Specifically in Article 119, this is divided into two parts. Part 1 covers information where the legislator would consider that the public interest in making the information available is overriding. This information will always be published from all registration dossiers and can never be claimed confidential. The second part of Article 119 covers information where there is a public interest in having the information available, but where it potentially has an impact on the commercial interest of the registrant. In this case, the information may be claimed confidential, as will be covered later, but the claim must be paid for and it must be justified, and only where the justification is accepted as valid by ECHA will the information be kept confidential. So information in registration of a chemical substance will be submitted to ECHA in the Euclid format, that is the International Uniform Chemical Information Database format. A Euclid dossier contains information which is always going to be published, covered by REACH Article 119.1. So this is the information where the public interest is considered to be paramount. Information such as the INEX name of the substance, the classification and labeling, physicochemical data, toxicological and ecotoxicological data, DNEX, PNLs, guidance on safe use, and any analytical methods. Then there's the information covered by Article 119 Part 2, which can be claimed confidential. This is information such as the degree of purity of the substance, the identity of any dangerous impurities or additives, the tonnage of the substance, how much of it is available on the EU market, details of study summaries, information from the safety data sheet, which will be covered later, trade names, and so on. There's also the volunteered information. This is information which isn't specifically covered by Article 119, but which is published unless claimed confidential by the registrant. An example would be safety data sheet information from registrants who don't legally require to provide safety data sheets. And then there's information which will never be published. This is the most confidential information, such as specific details of manufacturing processes, personal data, administrative data, which could lead people to trace back to the registrant or trace the supply chain, and so on. So now I will give a brief overview of the actual process used in dissemination. First, which dossiers do we disseminate? All successful REACH registration dossiers will be disseminated. This includes registrations as full registrations, on-site intermediates, transported intermediates, registrations as phase-in and non-phase-in substances, and lead, member, and individual submissions. In addition, we will disseminate the NANS notifications, which I'll come to in a moment, and in the future, we will disseminate biocides. So NANs, these are the previously notified substances notified under the previous chemical legislation, Directive 67/548. NANs that will be disseminated in 3 steps. A reduced dataset, which is already online from May. The SDS information will be published from November this year, and registrants have until 31st of October to update and claim confidential if they don't want the information published. And then for the NANs, the full dataset will be published from November next year. So as I mentioned earlier, information is submitted to ECHA in the format of a Euclid dossier. And Euclid 5.4, the current version, contains approximately 18,000 fields which are processed during dissemination. And as of today, there are over 30,000 dossiers online, so you can see that 300 million fields required to be processed. As you can imagine, IT tools are therefore key for dissemination, and this will be made clear in the next presentation. The dissemination process begins when a registration is complete successfully. The dossier will be picked up for dissemination and uploaded to our processing. This requires selection of various criteria by which dossiers are evaluated. For example, a joint submission member dossier will never be published before the respective joint submission lead. The next step is the filtering. This involves an IT tool which takes as input a reached registration dossier and processes it to remove all non-published information. So it will remove the information which is never published, and it will remove the information which has been claimed confidential. And the output will be a filtered dossier which contains only publishable information. The filtering works with filter rules, which will be gone through in more detail by my colleague Yannick Kilpedin. How filter rules work is very simple. Again, remember this is an IT process and is entirely automated. It takes as input the field content, looks at various criteria such as confidentiality flags, other fields, other conditions, and determines whether to publish or not publish the input field. Every field in the Euclid dossier, all 18,000, will have a filter rule applied to it. This is an example of a filter rule set, a screenshot from the technical annexes to Data Submission Manual 15. This manual gives field by field what will be published or not published for every field in Euclid 5.4. So, as I mentioned earlier, the output of the filtering process is a filtered dossier which contains only non-confidential information. The next step is aggregation. This is mainly useful for joint submissions where you can have one lead and up to 500 or 600 member dossiers submitting together. All of the dossiers will be uploaded and filtered, and then in the aggregation step, all of the dossiers will be merged into a single output dossier. So, as many dossiers as are in a joint submission will be taken as input by the aggregation tool. The output will be a single aggregated dossier which will contain all of the information from the input. And aggregation has 3 basic rules. For certain key information, it takes information only from the lead dossier. For example, substance and identity information, EC number, CAS number, UPAC name. For repeatable blocks in Euclid, for example, endpoint studies or table rows, it uses the add rule. So it will take the lead data first, followed by data from the member dossiers. In this step, it will also remove duplicates. So you'll have in the output unique data first from the lead, then from the members. And third, the merge rule. In this case, where there are gaps in the information provided by the lead, these gaps will be filled in by the information from the member dossiers. And as I said, the result of the aggregation step is a single output dossier which contains all of the data from the joint submission input. The next step is to convert this aggregated dossier into the set of HTML web pages that you see on the ECHA website. And this is an example of what you can see. Substance identification, overview of the type, the tonnage of the substance, registered suppliers, and so on. And this information is available now on the ECHA website for over 30,000 dossiers. So now I will briefly introduce Euclid 5.4. A lot of new information has been added to the Euclid format, specifically mostly information found from the safety data sheet. And the consequence for dissemination is that this information will be disseminated on the ECHA website in accordance with Article 119.2d. So a large number of fields have been added. The bulk, as I say, is safety data sheet information. So the new data that will be disseminated in brief is the registrant or supplier name for a substance, the registration number, the contact person for the safety data sheet, the outcome of the PBT assessment, the persistent bioaccumulative toxic, whether or not a chemical safety assessment has been performed for the substance, and the information on uses which is already disseminated today. Now some examples of how data will actually be aggregated. First, we'll look at the total tonnage band. So taking as examples 2 joint submissions and 1 individual submission, you can see that the input to each aggregation is all the dossiers in the joint or individual submission. In the first example, 1 dossier has the tonnage band claimed confidential, and in the first and second examples, there are 2 intermediate dossiers. What's going to be included in the aggregation for tonnage band is only the full dossiers where the tonnage band has not been claimed confidential. And you can see that here. The aggregation will first extract data from the dossiers. It will take the manufactured plus imported tonnage for the last year reported. It will aggregate by summing these tonnages, and then it will convert them into a band, which will be published on the ECHA website. For example, in the first case, if the 3 dossiers that were included added up to 5,000 tons, there was 1 dossier which was claimed confidential, remember, so the band published will be 1,000 plus tons. This is to indicate that in case the dossier which was claimed confidential had 6,000 or 7,000 tons, it would be enough to bring it up to the next tonnage band. So wherever you see an open band, you know that there is 1 or more dossiers claimed confidential in that joint submission. In the second example, there were no confidential dossiers, so the full data was provided. Assume that it was 150,000 tons total, so then the band published would be 100,000 to 1 million tons per annum. And in the case of the individual submission, again, nothing was claimed confidential, so whatever value was the sum of manufactured plus imported tonnage will be published as a band, say 1 to 10 tons. Now, the next example is looking at registrant supplier names. This will be published in November as part of the SDS information. Again, the input is all dossiers in the individual or joint submission. And what data will be included is the registrants which are not claimed confidential. So below you see a screenshot of of a registrant name which has been claimed confidential in section 1.1 of Euclid. The data that will be extracted is the legal entity name and address from ReachIT for each dossier, except in the case of only representatives. If the only representative does not provide a non-confidential supplier name, then the only representative name will be taken from ReachIT. If the only representative does provide suppliers with permission to use the supplier names, the suppliers' names and addresses will be published. And the aggregation output will be a list of company names and addresses in alphabetical order, with nothing to distinguish registrant manufacturers, importers, and suppliers. And this is an example of how it will look on the ECHA website in November. So in conclusion, we have briefly covered what is dissemination, given an outline of the dissemination process, informed you that all REACH registration dossiers will be disseminated, and briefly introduced Euclid 5.4 SDS information and some examples of how specific information is processed for dissemination. To help you, there are data submission manuals, 15 on dissemination, 16 on confidentiality claims, and 17 on deriving public names in case you claim a UPAC name confidential. Okay, thank you. I will now hand over to my colleague Janne Kilpinen, who will discuss filter rules.
My name is Janne Kilpinen. I will present to you dissemination filter rules. First, I will tell you what filter rules are and why it's useful to know them. And secondly, I present the basic filter rules and show some Euclid examples, followed by the conditional filter rules, and in the end, I have some experiences from the data we have so far received. The filter rule set is a translation of REACH regulation into Euclid. A filter rule is assigned for each Euclid field, enabling the filter tool to automatically determine if the content of a certain field is to be disseminated or not. The assigned rules I will tell you about, they are outlined together with screenshots from Euclid 5 in the technical annex of the Data Submission Manual 15 about dissemination. These rules are for standard dissemination of REACH registration dossiers. Initially, the nonce will be disseminated with a reduced set of information. So the basic rules. Fields marked with red N are not subject to automatic dissemination, even if not claimed confidential. Information in the fields marked with rule C are automatically disseminated unless the section they belong to is claimed confidential. The information in the fields applying rule A cannot be claimed confidential. And here's some examples. The endpoint summaries in Euclid sections 6 and 7 store information about the PNEC and DNL. These summaries contain only not published and always published fields, so no confidentiality can be claimed on these sections. For example, PNEC justifications, the discussion and conclusion on the classification and labeling are not disseminated, whereas PNEC's assessment factors and methods are disseminated. Here we have an example from the DNL summary. As you can see, mostly always automatically disseminated fields are there. It's good to note that in the endpoint study records, number of fields are marked with red A. So those fields are published even if confidentiality has been claimed on the study. And these always published fields are not only under the results and discussion section. Then conditional filter rules. The S rules trigger the publication of substance identifiers. The UPAC name and relevant fields, Cas number, molecular formula, weight range, SMILES, Inticode and structural formula, those are disseminated if the UPAC name has not been claimed confidential. The fields marked with rule S INEX are always published for INEX substances. If the substance is not listed in INEX, the UPAC name rule is used, meaning that if the UPAC name is not claimed confidential, the non-INEX EC number will be published. The rule S constituent. Unless the UPAC name has been claimed confidential and provided the section 1.2 constituents have not themselves been claimed confidential, the UPAC name and associated data for section 1.2 constituents are disseminated. How does this work? Here's an example. If the confidentiality flag for the UPAC name has been set in the Euclid section 1.1 or inside the reference substance linked from section 1.1, then the UPAC name is not disseminated, and also the section 1.2 constituents are removed, as for multi-constituent substance they might reveal the UPAC name. But if the concern is mainly disclosure of one or some constituents, then the confidentiality flag should be filled only in or on those constituents in Euclid section 1.2. As a result, the UPAC name in section 1.1, again, is not disseminated. But in this case, only the flagged constituent or constituents are removed and the rest is disseminated. So this was the case if the confidentiality flag for UPAC name is set in section 1.2. The rule I, the identity of an impurity or additive which is essential for the CNL will be automatically disseminated if the registrant has been indicated using the tick box that is shown here, that the impurity or additive is essential for CNL, unless confidentiality has been claimed on this section. The rule B, bibliographic references rule, protects not only the names of the study authors, but also the substance names that we often see in the title of the study. The fields author, title, and bibliographic source, they are not disseminated if the UPAC name is claimed confidential, or if the endpoint study record is claimed confidential. But here we have an exception. If the reference type is publication, review article, or handbook, then these fields are published even if the study record has been claimed confidential. These fields are not disseminated if the reference type is study report or company date, and also not if at least one of the following fields are filled in: testing lab, report number, owner company, or study number. The identity of test material. These fields are marked with rule C material. The identity in an endpoint study record will be disseminated if the identifier is CAS number, EC name, or UPAC name, and if the robust study summary data in the endpoint study record is not claimed confidential, and if the UPAC name of the substance being registered is not claimed confidential in the dossier. There are also other changes made to the dossier. UUIDs in the dossiers are replaced by newly generated random UUIDs, and the registrant's dossier modification history is completely removed. The registrant's endpoint record titles are removed in the filtering and replaced in the aggregation step by standard endpoint titles. And here we have an example of recreated title, an experimental result from a joint submission member dossier where the study purpose flag is not assigned. And some feedback. The UPAC name confidentiality claims are triggered if a constituent in Euclid section 1.2 is flagged confidential. But often, as we can see from the justifications here in ECHA, the concern is the typical concentration or the concentration range. And in these cases, no flag is needed because those fields are not automatically disseminated. Please remember to fill in the checkbox in section 1.2 if an impurity or additive is relevant for the classification and labeling. Fill in the information in correct fields. This is important as the process is automated. And please avoid referring to attached documents, as the referring text might be disseminated, but the attachments are not. And an advertisement: with the Euclid 5 dissemination plugin, you can simulate on your own dossier before submission how the filter rules work on your own data. And if something in the resulting filter dossier or in the filter report is not clear for you, then you can look at the data submission manual 15 about dissemination, plus the technical annexes with the Euclid screenshots.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the latest lead registrant webinar from ECHA about dissemination and confidentiality claims. My name is István Mák, and in this second half of the webinar, together with my colleague Martin, we're going to talk about claiming information confidential, what to include in the justification, and we will have a presentation about the new safety data sheet type claims. For those of you who have been with us earlier this year in Helsinki on the lead registrant workshop, some of my slides might be familiar, but as during the summer there has been quite substantial changes with the IT system, with the implementation of Euclid and Reach IT, even for those of you there might be some useful information in the slides. And especially the presentation coming up after my slides for all of you might be very important. So let's get started with the agenda of my presentation. The presentation, what I have, is divided into 4 parts. The first one is about the legislative background and the actual process of claiming information confidential. So more or less about what can I claim confidential, how this confidentiality claim has to be introduced in a Euclid dossier and the substance data set, and if and how much do I have to pay for a confidentiality claim. The second part of the presentation is about the justification, what you will have to provide in order to have your confidentiality claim accepted. And in this part, I will go into more details about what parts of the justification has to be present, what are the elements that has to be present, and how to include this justification into the Euclid dossier. Then moving on to the third part of my presentation, you will hear some feedback from ECHA, what we have learned throughout assessing the confidentiality claims, what we have seen so far. And last but not least, I would like to close my presentation with some key messages. So let's get started with the first part of my presentation about what information can be claimed confidential. As you might remember, my colleague Owen earlier has told you that certain information within the REACH legislation are called confidential business information, and these information are never published. And one good example for this would be, for example, the exact tonnage information, what you would put in section 3.2 of your Euclid dossier. This information contains the exact tonnage information of how much of the substance you're either manufacturing or importing into Europe. Then other parts of the Euclid dossier are always published, and the information which are always published are listed in Article 119.1 of the REACH legislation. And a very good example for this would be probably the classification and labeling information of your substance. That information can always be found on the ECHA dissemination website. But in between these two groups, there's a third one, a list of information which you can find in Article 119.2 of the REACH legislation, what you can actually claim confidential. And if you pay the fee and you provide an adequate justification for this confidentiality claim, then this information will not be published on the ECHA dissemination website after a thorough assessment by the confidentiality claim assessment team. So what information can I actually claim confidential? And for that, to help you a bit, here's a visual representation of the Euclid section 3. And to start with, in Euclid section 1.1 and 1.2, you can claim the UPAC name, the degree of purity, identity of impurities, or identity of additives confidential, and also the trade name. This information, as I said, can be claimed confidential in section 1.1 or 1.2. Then the big change compared to the previous interpretation is the safety data sheet claims. Previously, it was only covering section 3.5 and section 3.6, the uses and the uses advised against, but this has been extended, and now you can also claim confidentiality on your legal entity, on your registration number, the results of the PBT assessment, as I said previously, the uses advised against, and the exposure scenarios, and whether or not a chemical safety assessment was done or not. Then moving on from section 4 to 7, where you have to enter the study summaries and robust study summaries, you can introduce a confidentiality claim on these information. And last but not least, there is a claim, the possibility to claim the tonnage band information confidential, and that one you have to introduce while you are creating your dossier in the dossier header. And as always, I would like to point out that this is not a claim on your tonnage information, this is a claim on your tonnage band. So if I have decided that I would like to claim certain information confidential in my Euclid dossier, how can I actually introduce these claims? And to show you this process, I would like to show it through you through a UPAC name claim. Here you can see a screenshot from section 1.2. This is actually a constituent of a substance. And first of all, you have to flag the relevant information. In this case, just above the constituent, you can find a place where you can introduce the flag for the confidentiality request. You have multiple options regarding the flag types, what you would like to use. From our point of view, it doesn't make any difference if you're using confidential business information or intellectual property or any of the other possibilities, but in our example, we have used CBI as the flag. Then it's not enough if you introduce a flag, but you also have to introduce a justification for the confidentiality claim. Previously, what we have asked you is to include a reference to the justification within the free text field for the confidentiality flag. Nowadays, since Euclid 5.4, you can actually include your full justification there. But in case if you introduce the justification as an attachment, then please still make sure that you have a reference to that, as you will need to have text in this field in order to pass business rules. And in case if you decide to use an attachment and not the free text field, then make sure that you actually do attach the confidentiality claim justification to your substance data set. So the next question is that if I have introduced a confidentiality claim, do I have to pay for it or not? And the very short answer is that yes, you will have to pay for it. But what is very important to know, that this is not a fee for the actual confidentiality, this is a fee what you are paying for the processing of your confidentiality claim and the assessment of your justification. The fee, what you will have to pay, depends very much on multiple factors. One of them would be the company size, the claim type, or whether or not you are in a joint submission or not. And in the fee regulation, which is part of the REACH legislation, you can see the price for the confidentiality claims, and there are discounts for small and medium enterprises. So the fee for the confidentiality claim can be as little as 113 euros if you're a micro-sized company submitting a confidentiality claim on your UPAC name as part of a joint submission. But it can go as high as 4,500 euros if you are a large company submitting a confidentiality claim on your UPAC name, on your degree of purity, and you're submitting individually. But in order to be able to avoid any bad surprises, we would suggest you strongly to run the Euclid fee calculation plugin on your dossier after you have created it, but before you submit it to ECHA. This Euclid plugin, which can be downloaded free of charge from the Euclid website, can simulate the invoicing process carried out within ECHA, and you can get a good understanding on any possible fees you will have to pay after your submission. Moving on to the second part of my presentation, during the next few slides, you can learn about the justification, what you will have to include together with your confidentiality claim. You have to remember that certain elements of a justification has to be present in a justification provided, no matter what your circumstances are. And one of the first one of these would be a declaration. Within the declaration part of your justification, the registrant, so you, can declare what information you would like to claim confidential, and you also have to make a declaration that this information cannot be found in a public domain. In most cases, if the information is in public domain, it already invalidates the claim. But in certain cases, like for example, if you're claiming confidentiality on your trade name, it only invalidates the claim if the trade name can be found in connection with the substance you are registering. Then the next obligatory part of a justification would be a commercial interest. You have to explain what your commercial interest is and why that information, what you're trying to claim confidential, is worthy of protection. Then also you have to describe what would be the harm to you or to your company if the information you're trying to claim confidential would be disseminated on ECHA's website. And I would like to remind you that there has to be a causal link between the commercial interest and a potential harm. Then, in case if you'd like to claim confidentiality on your information only for a certain period of time, then the validity of the claim should also be mentioned in the justification, together with a contact person. And we would really suggest you to include a contact person in your justification, as it makes all of our life much easier in case when we are carrying out the assessment on your justification, we would like to contact you for any further clarification, or we would have a few questions related to the justification. It's so much easier just to pick up the phone and be able to talk to the right person immediately than going through switchboards and 5 to 10 people. But these information both of these are optional, so it's absolutely up to you if you would like to include them in your justification or not. And last but not least, if you're claiming justification on your UPAC name, you will have to provide an adequate public name in section 1.1 also. And that public name is a masked version of your UPAC name in most cases. If you would like to use multiple level of masking on your UPAC name, then you have to provide a justification for that also within the justification. But again, if you're using only a single level of masking on your UPAC name, then there is no need for this part of the justification. Then how to include the actual justification in the Euclid dossier? Since the introduction and use of Euclid 5.4, you have the possibility to include your justification in its entirety in the free text field next to the flag. As the free text field size has been increased from the previous 2,000 character to more than 35,000 character, so it should be possible to include a proper justification within that field. And another important information is that the template, what ECHA has developed for the format of the justifications, can simply be included with a click of a button in all of these fields where you have the possibility to claim information confidential. And in those cases, the only work you have to do is to fill in the company-specific information and explain your specific circumstances. Also, you still have the possibility to include your justification as an attachment, preferably in a PDF format, but also a Word document or other common formats will be accepted. In this case, if you would like to go with the attachment, templates can be found as an example at the end of the Dossier Submission Manual 16, which is available on our website. In the third part of my presentation, I would like to provide you some feedback from ECHA, what we have learned throughout our assessment of confidentiality claims so far. First and foremost, what you have to remember that this is a regulatory process and it's a chargeable service. So be flag aware. You have to make sure that you're only marking information confidential in your substance data set which you really would like to claim confidential, and think about the cost and consequences, what you have to face with the inclusion of the confidentiality claim flags. We had a case when the registrant has marked most of his dossier confidential, and at the end he asked for a withdrawal of his submission as he did not necessarily feel like paying for the invoice, which was well above 100,000 euros. Whenever you're introducing a confidentiality claim, make sure that you're only trying to claim information confidential that can actually be claimed confidential. In certain cases, the UPAC name is, for example, an information that cannot be claimed confidential, and in case you include a flag on it, you will not receive an invoice and you will not be assessed on the confidentiality claim, and eventually your UPAC name will be published. Also, in case if you end up in a situation during the CIF negotiations or in other negotiations that you get hold on information that the study owner provides you for the purpose of registration, but ask you to keep it confidential, and as such they make you sign a non-disclosure agreement, obviously you would like to keep this information confidential, keep that study confidential, and as such please make sure that you describe this information in the justification properly with the declaration or maybe parts of your non-disclosure agreements provided. What is very important is that you make an internet search before you submit your dossier to ECHA and try to find if the information, what you are trying to claim confidential, can be found in public domain or not. In most cases, if you do a simple search with either Bing or Google or any other internet search providers, you will find out that many of the information, what you would like to claim confidential, can actually be already found in public domain. And in these cases, you will end up having to pay for a confidentiality claim assessment, but at the end, there's a high likelihood that your confidentiality claim will be rejected. And if you make the proper searches, you can save quite some money for yourself. Also very important not to put confidential information into fields which are otherwise always disseminated. To help you with this, you should check the technical annexes of the Data Submission Manual 15. In case, if you, for example, again, let's go back to the UPAC name claim. If you would like to claim your UPAC name confidential, please do not include your UPAC name unmasked in the public name field, as the public name field is always disseminated, and an unmasked UPAC name will be accepted as an appropriate public name, but as it will be disseminated, we would believe that you don't necessarily reach what you would have liked to gain with the confidentiality claim. Moving on, it's very important for you to use the Euclid dissemination plugin, which has already been introduced to you by my colleagues earlier today. With that plugin, you can simulate the process of dissemination, and you can get a good understanding of what information will be disseminated from your dossier on ECHA's website. Again, if you are claiming your UPAC name confidential, make sure that an appropriate public name is provided in the correct field of the Euclid dossier. And to help you with this, to help you derive an appropriate public name, ECHA has issued earlier a manual. It's the Data Submission Manual 17, which is also available on our website. And in case if you end up having received an update request letter from us after we have initially assessed your justifications, then there are two things what you have to pay attention to, other than, of course, in case you wish to correct the information in it. In case if you have been asked to provide justification because ECHA has assessed your claim and we have found that there is no or hardly any justification in your dossier, then make sure you actually do attach the justification to your dossier, because we have seen many cases then when the registrant have updated the dossier within the given time frame, and in the remarks field they have claimed that now the justification is provided, but unfortunately the justification was still not in the dossier. Also, in case if you decide to eventually drop the confidentiality claim after receiving an update request, then make sure you're in your update dossier you actually remove those claims, because we have also seen multiple cases where registrant have entered again in the remarks field in the dossier header that after receiving an update request we have decided that we would not like to pursue any further with this claim, and that's why we're dropping it. But unfortunately the flags were still present in the dossier, and as such the registrant eventually has received a negative final decision on its confidentiality claim. And to conclude my presentation, I would like to provide you with some key messages. Remember that the confidentiality assessment is a regulatory process under REACH, and you have to pay a fee for it. It's strongly recommended to read the released publications. These are Data Submission Manuals 15 to 17 and the relevant technical annexes. Verify the non-availability of information in public domain. As I said it previously, you can save a lot of money with this. Prepare a thorough justification, and remember that there has to be a causal link in between the commercial interest and the potential harm. Use the available IT tools for you, both the fee calculation plugin and the dissemination plugin, so you can have a good understanding on the possible invoices and what information will be disseminated later on. If you receive a letter for requesting you to update your dossier, make sure that all deficiencies are addressed. In case if you are unsure for any reason after reading the update request letters on why you have been requested for an update, please do not hesitate and contact our help desk, and you will receive further help. And last but not least, there is a second chance for everyone. So in case the first time around your justification has not been found adequate by ECHA, you will receive a chance to update your dossier. But in order to be able to use this chance, you have to make sure that you check your Reach IT account regularly and look for any possible messages coming from ECHA. It is your responsibility to keep up with your inbox. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I would like to pass on the mic to my colleague Martin, who will tell you all about the new SDS claims.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon. I also want to welcome you to this webinar. My name is Martin Albert, and as already indicated, I will now present you more details on the new confidentiality claim times on the safety data sheet information. Now I just want to start with a short content of this presentation. I will first of all start with some background information, also including with some kind of timelines, and then I will give an overview, general information on the safety data sheet claims, and after that I will go more into detail or into a more detailed description of the new safety data sheet claims. Okay, so let's start with the background information and the timelines. According to Article 119.2 of REACH, ECHA is required to disseminate certain information unless it is claimed confidential. In this article, basically the description is quite generic. It's called information other than listed in paragraph 1, which is contained in the safety data sheet. And you all might be familiar with safety data sheets. So ECHA initially decided to only include users and users advised against under Article 119.2d. But now, following a reinterpretation of the scope of this Article 119.2d, now more information from registration dossiers will be disseminated starting from November 2012. This is now followed up by the timelines, and this is now also very important for previously submitted dossiers or registrants who have submitted their dossier previously, because now with this extension of the scope, you now need to carefully review your dossier. You need to edit and insert the new claim types if appropriate, and you need to resubmit your dossier. And the resubmission has to take place best before 31st of October 2012, because starting from November 2012, ECHA will start disseminating the information, if not claimed confidential, of course. Beside of this webinar, you can also find further assistance on help desk, but also with a dissemination and fee calculation plugin, and also in the data submission manuals 15 and 16 on the ECHA website. So just for repetition, we've heard this already, that safety data sheet information will be disseminated, namely the registration number, then also the registrant's name, the so-called company name information. Still, the old claim is the life cycle description. This used to be the users and also the users advised against. And ECHA will also start disseminating the result of the PBT and the VPVB assessments, which is for persistent bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals, and the very persistent and very bioaccumulative substances. Furthermore, ECHA will disseminate the indication of whether a chemical safety assessment was performed or not. And later on, it means not before 2014, ECHA will also disseminate exposure scenario elements. Okay, this will now be followed by general information on the safety data sheet claims. In comparison to other claims, we have two very important principles on the new claim types. The first one is that the claim on the safety data sheet will only be invoiced once for all items and independent from the number of individual SDS items claimed. But on the other hand, ECHA requires an individual justification for each item claimed confidential separately. It means, for example, when you have claimed the company name confidential and the registration number, you would have to put two justifications, namely one for the company name claim and the second one for the registration number. At the same time, of course, you will still only be invoiced once for the claim on the safety data sheet. ECHA will invoice the claim according to the fee regulation, and of course there is a variety of factors which determine the fee you have to pay. The information on the safety data sheet is up to 3,000 euros. Of course there will be discounts for small and medium-sized enterprises. More details can be found in the legal text to that. But to avoid for you any confusion, ECHA always recommends you to always use the updated version of the fee calculation plugin, because our fee calculation plugin uses the same logic as our REACH IT invoicing does. And also in the tool you will find an indication of where a chargeable confidentiality flag is being put in your dossier. So you can reconsider putting the flag or not when you see the result of the fee calculation plugin. And it is also important to note that since not all information is in general available from the field calculation plugin, you have to indicate additional, for example, tick boxes or check boxes before running the tool. For example, there's some kind of SDS indicator where you need to indicate if a safety data sheet is required for you. And there's also a PBT or VBT indicator. And also when your member dossier cannot be clear if it's a hazardous substance or not, so you also have to indicate this in the field calculation plugin. Of course, there are several circumstances which need to be checked first if a confidentiality claim on the safety data sheet is chargeable or not. In general, ECHA will only consider a safety data sheet info as chargeable when, of course, you require a safety data sheet. The criteria for that are basically listed in the REACH Article 31. There's listed when you need a safety data sheet. But in addition, also ECHA considers you not requiring a safety data sheet when you submit a dossier for an on-site isolated intermediate OC dossier. But still it's important to note, even when there's no safety data sheet required for you, still you need to put the flag on the confidentiality information, because the confidentiality claim indicates that the registrant does not volunteer the publication of the information. Even though there will not be a fee charged, you still need to put the flag in case you don't want to volunteer this information. Furthermore, and for some items are only chargeable information, or are only considered as chargeable confidentiality claims when actually a chemical safety report is required. For example, for the information in section 2.3, the PBT assessment or the chemical safety assessment, ECHA will not charge if you don't need a chemical safety report in your dossier. Let's go again to the criteria when a safety data sheet is required for your dossier. According to Article 31, the first criterion is that your substance needs to be hazardous. ECHA therefore checks the definition by Article CLP 58.2 as submitted by the registrant in the EUCLID dossier, and ECHA takes therefore the section 2.1 of the dossier or of the lead dossier, depending of your member or not. Furthermore, you are deemed to have a safety data sheet required when your substance is a PBT or VP-VB substance, which is indicated in section 2.3 endpoint summary in your dossier. And the third criterion is that your substance is included in the candidate list. This is identified by ECHA by the EC number, CAS number, or UPAC name. But usually it's very unlikely that you have a candidate list substance and it's not hazardous, so it's not already covered by the criteria number A. And beyond the scope of Article 31, ECHA does, like the safety data sheet criteria, not applicable for on-site isolated intermediates, because it's not clear if you need a safety data sheet for those substances or not. Okay, now I will go into more detail of the individual claim types and show where you can flag them in the EUCLID dossier. The first claim type is the company name claim type. This is found in section 1.1 of EUCLID. If you are a manufacturer or an importer, the registrant name will be disseminated unless it is claimed confidential in this particular section 1.1. When you are only representative, it's slightly different. It will be disseminated unless it's claimed confidential, or unless suppliers, that means importers, are listed in section 1.7, whose identity is not claimed confidential. And this is now very important. If you are an OR and you have indicated suppliers in this particular section 1.7, you definitely need to attach a permission from your suppliers that ECHA can disseminate these on the ECHA website. Then next point is that the name of third-party representatives will never be disseminated, and the legal entity name and full address will be disseminated. That's also important to note that the information for that is taken from REACH IT, except of course in the case when the supplier details are indicated in section 1.7 in Euclid and they are not claimed confidential. Here's also an overview sheet of several cases for this company name claim. Basically, when you're a manufacturer or importer, the cases are quite simple. So either you have put a flag or you did not put a flag in section 1.1. When you did not put a flag in section 1.1, ECHA will disseminate the legal entity information. And when you have put the corresponding flag, the claim will be invoiced, but the information will be kept confidential. It's more complicated when for only representatives. Again, when you don't flag anything, ECHA will, and you did not indicate suppliers, ECHA will disseminate the only representative's name. When you flagged suppliers in section 1.7 and the suppliers are present and the only representative name is not flagged confidential, ECHA will also disseminate the only representative's name. In case there are suppliers present and there is no flag, ECHA will disseminate the suppliers in 1.7, provided that you have attached this agreement that we can disseminate this. It's very important to, in case you don't have this agreement from your suppliers, we can also provide you some alternative solutions. The best idea is, of course, to put a flag in section 1.1. This would then be a chargeable flag, and then the company name would, no name would be disseminated, and it would be claimed as confidential. The second alternative is that you put a flag in section 1.7. This would be free of charge, but then, of course, the name of the only representative will be disseminated. And a third solution is, because the section 1.7 is repeatable blocks, that you have like partially the agreement from your suppliers, so that you flag those confidential where you don't have an agreement, and ECHA can disseminate the ones which have an agreement in 1.7, because it's basically a repeatable block, and you can partially flag them and partially not flag those. It's also important to know that in section 1.1 there's a new so-called competent person responsible for the safety data sheet, the so-called contact person for the safety data sheet. If you don't agree to disseminate this information, you can flag this section free of charge. Otherwise, the information will be disseminated, namely the organization name, the phone number, and also the address. But again, it's important to know it's not your company's phone number, it's only this competent person responsible for the safety data sheet. Also important to note is how it will be disseminated later on. There will be no direct link, for example, between the registration number and the company name or the tonnage bands. It will be just aggregated the way it is shown here. So we will basically have a list of registrants and then a list of registration numbers, and basically the tonnage band independent from that. Okay, the second claim type I want to describe more in detail is the section 1.3, the registration number. The basic rule is that the registration number will be disseminated in full. It means all 13 digits, unless you claim the section confidential. And if the registrant name has been claimed confidential in section 1.1, but the registration has not been claimed, ECHA will hide the last 4 digits, because this is company-specific information. And the section 1.3 can be claimed basically in 2 places. It can be claimed on the one hand in the dossier header and in section 1.3 directly on the registration number. The third item which can be claimed confidential is then the endpoint summary in section 2.3. It's the outcome of the PBT assessment. The basic rule also here is that the information will be disseminated unless claimed confidential, and this is just a flag above the summary in section 2.3. It's basically the same also for the section 2.3 endpoint study records, the result on PBT assessment. The same rule is that ECHA will disseminate the information unless it is claimed confidential. In addition, it is important to know that the reference substance attached to this endpoint study will not be disseminated. The next item is then the formerly uses, which are now renamed into life cycle description because it's a slightly different section. The identified uses has been renamed and it has will still be disseminated as already before, and the same information will be disseminated. The new tables in this section will be disseminated in a similar way, but you can carefully check with your filter tool which section will be disseminated and which one will not. Again, you can claim each use individually, and there will basically be one fee for the sector data sheet claim. The same is also for the section 3.6, the use advice against. And again, the information will be disseminated for those items which are not claimed confidential, and ECHA will not disseminate the claimed uses when the claim is accepted. The next point is section 3.7, the endpoint study records. In the future, after 2014, the exposure scenarios and local assessment will be disseminated at some point. ECHA strongly recommends not to put a flag there at the moment because it will not be disseminated right now. But still, registrants are strongly encouraged to complete this section already now, mainly for two reasons. The first of all is, of course, that now Euclid 5.4 was updated to provide an opportunity to store this information in a very structured and harmonized format. And also, you would not have to update the dossier later on and rewrite the whole section when you put it already here. ECHA will inform registrants in time about the specific dissemination rules and about the timetable when the dissemination will take place. Section 3.373 is also a new item. It used to be part of the uses section in 3.5 in the past, before it was updated to Euclid 5.4. And ECHA will disseminate this generic exposure potential in full unless you put a flag on top of this section. The last item is then the assessment report. So you can claim confidentiality on the chemical safety assessment if it was performed or not. It is very important that ECHA will, of course, not disseminate the chemical safety report. It will never disseminate this. It will only disseminate the fact that it was performed or not. And if you want to claim the section confidential, put the flag in the appropriate location in this section. Okay, so now at the end of the presentation, I just want to make some final conclusions. It's always strongly recommended to use the latest version of the dissemination plugin, to check your dossier before you submit it. If you are fine, or if you all the fields are what you expected, what you put in the previous dossier. And you should definitely resubmit your dossier before end of October 2012 if you have new claims on the safety data sheet, or if you require new claims on these new claim types. And last but not least, I want to emphasize again that it's very important that when you are only representative and you have listed suppliers in section 1.7, that you need to attach the permission of the suppliers that those can be disseminated. Okay, so I want to thank you again. This is now the end of the presentation, and there will now be a final keynote from my colleague, Catherine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. So to conclude this webinar, I would like to present a few key messages and useful information for you to be aware of as the lead registrant. So the key messages we have for you today is to be aware that we disseminate all registration dossiers. So once it has received a registration number, your registration dossier will be disseminated in the ECHA dissemination portal for registered substances. And you have the web address there on your screen, so you can have a look at what it looks for the registration dossiers that have already been submitted and disseminated. Usually it takes a few months before a registration dossier is disseminated. But it's important to prepare your dossier for dissemination before you submit it to us. And there are several things you can do. First one is to discuss within the CIF about the claiming of confidentiality of common elements in the dossier, for example, the UPAC name. Owen explained how within a joint submission the information of the lead dossier and the member dossiers is aggregated. So it's important that there is agreement within the CIF about claiming things confidential that are common to the dossier, to avoid being in a situation where confidentiality by some members is overwritten by not claiming confidentiality on the same information by other members or the lead in the joint submission. So discuss confidentiality within the CIF. Another thing is to use the dissemination manual and to familiarize yourself with the filter rules to avoid unnecessary confidentiality claims. And confidentiality claims are, for example, unnecessary if they are meant to prevent the dissemination of information that we do not disseminate anyway, such as, for example, the typical concentration of your constituents. This information is not disseminated, and therefore confidentiality claims are not necessary. And if you put a confidentiality claim within your constituents section, it will end up being a UPAC name claim, and it will be charged. So therefore, if your concern is on the typical concentration range, then a confidentiality claim is not needed. We can also bring the example of the results of study summaries, which are always disseminated, so there is no possibility to claim them confidential. So if you do not want to have the results of a robust study summary disseminated, that is not something that can be done, and confidentiality claims in this case will not be useful for you, but you will be charged for them. So use the dissemination manual, familiarize yourself with the rules, and also use the dissemination plugin, which simulates for you which information will end up on the ECHA website, and then you can review what it looks like and if it looks the way you want it. We also have key messages concerning confidentiality claims. If you have confidentiality claims in your dossier, they need to be individually justified. You need to demonstrate that a commercial interest exists, that you have taken measures to protect these commercial interests, and that you will potentially suffer harm if this information is published on the ECHA website. Also, if you have a UPAC name claim in your dossier, you need to provide a public name for your substance so that we can disseminate your dossier with useful substance identifiers. Also remember that more safety data sheet information will be disseminated. As of November 2012, company names and registration numbers, amongst others, will be disseminated unless they have been claimed confidential. This means for previous registrations that have already been submitted to ECHA, that updates have to be submitted before the 31st of October 2012. So then on to our upcoming events. The next milestone in this webinar series for lead registrants is a webinar on the general principles of dossier preparation and submission taking place on the 19th of October. It is the first in a series of more technical webinars outlining key steps in the dossier preparation and submission process. The webinars that follow include a webinar on business rules on the 9th of November and a webinar covering the technical completeness check process and invoicing and payment on the 22nd of November. You will be receiving personal invitations for all the lead registrant webinars. In addition to the dedicated lead registrant webinars, ECHA has recently announced 2 additional webinars open for all. The first webinar is entitled How to Bring Your Registration Dossier in Compliance with REACH, Tips and Hints Part 1. It provides feedback to registrants on how to submit information on chemical substances in a technical dossier to ECHA in compliance with REACH. This webinar takes place on the 27th of September. The second webinar, What Should Every Registrant Know About Substance Evaluation, gives an overview of the purpose of substance evaluation under REACH and its practical implementation. It provides important recommendations for the registrants how to cooperate with ECHA and the evaluating member states if their substance is selected for substance evaluation. This webinar takes place on the 5th of October. We would also like to draw your attention to the agency's second workshop for lead registrants taking place on the 11th and 12th of October. The workshop gives you the opportunity for face-to-face discussion with our experts, as well as other lead registrants with previous experience of REACH. You will also receive training on the new versions of IT tools, such as Euclid, Quasar, and REACH IT. A more detailed program is available on the ECHA website. Also, further information on registration for ECHA events can be found on our website. So at this point in time, we are no longer accepting new questions for this webinar. If you already received a written reply via the Q&A panel, you can log off from the webinar after this presentation. Our panelists will continue to respond to unanswered questions until 2 o'clock. If you received instructions to be contacted by phone, our panelists will begin to call you from now until 2 o'clock. In case you were advised to use the help desk contact form to submit your question, you will have received a link to the contact form in your reply. Connect to the form, submit your answer, and our help desk will provide you with the reply within 15 working days. We also have a post-event survey. So once the event has ended, you will be directed to a post-event survey page. Your feedback is important to us. It helps us to make the content of future webinars more relevant for your individual needs. So please take the time to fill out the survey. So this concludes our webinar for today. We hope you found the information useful. We thank you for your attention, and we hope to see you at our forthcoming events.